Shalom l'kulam. I know it's been a little while, but that's because really not much has happened. Life's been the same. I've been working on the internship and studying my Hebrew. The past 2 days, however, have really given me something to talk about. Yesterday, we went on a trip up north. We visited Caesarea, Haifa, and a small town that I had never heard of before. I'm not going to tell you what that is quite yet. It's going to be a surprise. Very important, but very special place. Caesarea was absolutely beautiful. The meeting of the yellows and the orange of the sand and the stone and the white and the blue of the sea and the blue of the clouds and it all coming together and the spray off of the rocks. The beauty, it's the first thing to convey. Secondly, Caesarea turned out to be a really historically exciting space. It's gone from a Roman port to an Ottoman port, conquered multiple times, was involved with the Crusades. It was the end of the Silk Road and the Perfume Road. It was the major export port from all points east to all points west. The Palestinian prefecture under Roman rule thrived because of the economic strength that Caesarea brought to the region. Under Rome, it was the administrative capital, while Jerusalem was the spiritual capital. There is a hill in Caesarea where there has consistently been a house of worship. Although in the history that I was given, it has never been a Jewish house of worship. It has been a Roman house of worship, a Muslim mosque, and I believe right now it's a restaurant. There's a small city that's built up around Caesarea. They've restored the amphitheater there to a shadow of its former glory. It's only 2 tiers. The 3rd tier is now gone. But it's still alive. Unlike, say, the Colosseum, they use this theater for performances. If an Israeli artist gets the opportunity to play Caesarea, they have made it big. It's not the biggest venue in the country, but it is by far the most significant. The view was beautiful. I got to meet new people from my group. There was a small contingent even from Jerusalem. There are people who live downtown in addition to the people living in the dorms. It was a really, really good time. After Caesarea, we got back on the bus and headed for points further north. Zichron Yaakov is a town with a story I had never heard before. Zichron Yaakov was one of the very first Jewish settlements in the first wave of Aliyah in the 19th century. It was started by people who came out of Europe and were fleeing from anti-Semitism and oppression and all of those terrible things that pepper the Jewish narrative throughout the world. They come to Israel, which at that point was Ottoman Palestine. They decline Turkish citizenship. They legally purchase land from the surrounding Muslim people and build a village on top of a hill. One of the gentlemen in that village finds a species of native wheat that, when hybridized with the modern, at that time, European wheat, allowed it to be much hardier and much more bountiful. Zichron Yaakov became very, very wealthy. World War I hit. One family in Zichron Yaakov, the founding family in Zichron Yaakov, decided that they needed to take action during the war. There was much discussion amongst the people of the town whether it would be better for them if the British won or if the Ottoman won. And although there was a very, very, very loud voice that said, even though we like the British, we can't do anything against the Ottomans, because if the British lose and we'd acted against the Ottomans, we would be in major trouble. A small group of people decided that they would actively spy against the Ottomans and transmit the information to a British ship waiting offshore. Now, when I say transmit, they were very vague, but we got the idea that it was walk down the hill to the seacoast in the dead of night and then rowing out to hand transport documents. There was no means of long-distance conveyance of information. Needless to say, there was a lot of drama, and due to the compressed amount of time I have here, I'm going to skip right to the dramatic conclusion. The only people who were injured or died during this operation against the Ottomans were the people directly involved with the spy. They managed to keep everyone else of Zichron Yaakov safe. The woman in charge shot herself, stuck the gun in the mouth, missed her brain. I'm guessing she held it a little high. She hit her spinal cord instead. 4 days of the Ottoman doctors trying to save her life so she can be further interrogated. She slipped away without revealing anything. Now, according to the video produced by the people of Zichron Yaakov, the information that they were able to convey to the British was vital towards securing the British victory in the region of Palestine. I don't know if my lack of knowledge about Zichron Yaakov is the gap in the North American supplemental Jewish education system, or if really, in the grand scheme of things, the events of the spy ring made the people of Zichron Yaakov feel very good about themselves, while at the same time not contributing in any history book turning way toward the war effort. They definitely, no doubt about it, made things much easier to the British, much easier for the British with the information that they conveyed. I'm nowhere near historian enough to know why I didn't previously know the story of Zichron Yaakov, but the fact that I didn't just makes me wonder what other news stories I'm going to get to hear. Zichron Yaakov was amazing. After Zichron Yaakov, we continued our journey. For lunch, we journeyed to a Druze village in the Carmel Mountains. Now, I consider myself a scholar of comparative religion, particularly the Abrahamic faiths, but the Druze are a people who I know little to nothing of. We had a overly charming young guide to the Druze people, a secular woman who, well, being secular is a very big thing, as is being religious for the Druze. I'll just tell it through what I learned as opposed to describing a person. Now, first thing you need to know is I can only talk about how the Druze religion impacts the lives of the people. I cannot speak to the beliefs themselves. There are two types of Druze. There are the religious Druze and the secular Druze. Any secular Druze can choose to be a religious Druze so long as they haven't made one of two major mistakes that a person can make. The first is sex outside of marriage. The second is killing anybody. If you are a religious Druze, you get to go to their house of worship, their house of study, which from the outside looks like an ordinary home, and on the inside is a large, unadorned, empty space. No matter what your social stature, everybody prays on the same floor, literally on the floor, undecorated. From our guide's description, I haven't actually been inside such a house of worship. Now, the Druze value allegiance to whatever country they are in. They, as they tell it, they are a very old people. They existed before the Jews, and during the time of the Jews, they existed among the Jews, outwardly Jewish, but praying in a Druze manner, following the Druze secrets. Similar to how in Spain in the 1400s, we would outwardly do our best to look Catholic and light Shabbat candles behind closed windows. During Christian rule, they appeared Christian. And when the Muslims came into town, they appeared Muslim. Now, modern scholarship tells that they split up from a Muslim sect. Not Shiite, not Sunni, a smaller sect. They split off and now have their own religious identity. According to the Druze narrative, that is entirely incorrect. Unfortunately, The only way to study the Druze religious texts is to be a religious Druze. You can't convert into the Druze faith. There are only a limited number of Druze souls in the world. And I know I'm using Druze as an adjective and a noun. I don't know all the grammatically correct ways of changing that word. It's sad, but it's true. There are only about 1.5 million Druze souls in the world, and when a Druze dies, they are immediately reborn. Now, our entirely secular guide told us a story of a girl she knew who, when this girl was 3, told her parents, "You aren't my parents." And the parents, of course, were shocked. Now, this behavior continued until finally the father, who, being a Druze, believed in reincarnation, said, "Okay, we aren't your parents." Put the little girl in the car and said, "Show me where your parents are." The little girl, who had never left the village, directed the father to drive out of town. Down the road, it's a long drive. They come to another village. And after a few turn heres, okay, stop. And the father finds himself and his daughter in a town that he'd never been to, that she had never been to, in front of a house he'd never seen before, owned by people he's never met, that his daughter's never met. They knock on the door of the house and they're welcomed. And it turns out that the owners of that house had lost their child, an adult at that point in time, but had lost their adult child on the exact same day that that little girl was born. Because of the multiplicity of stories like that, our guide, although not initiated into the secrets and secular in every way, down to the point of telling us quite bluntly she's atheist, believes in reincarnation. Kind of cool. On a personal note, I find the Druze religion, because of its emphasis of secrets, beautifully frustrating. Whenever I study religion, I try to study it not in a way that evaluates whether that religion is true or isn't true, but simply from an understanding that the religion illustrates how the people interact with the divine. And here is at least in the eyes of scholarship, Abrahamic faith, and I love the Abrahamic faiths, a monotheistic Abrahamic faith that interacts with the eternal that created the heavens and the earth, in other words, the same eternal that Judaism addresses. And I can't study their beliefs, their philosophy, or anything. I hope to one day have the time to sit down, get to know a few Druze, both religious and secular, and at least study how their beliefs impact their daily lives. I might not be able to know what those beliefs are, but I could at least maybe see what their folkways are, what their practice is. I would love to be given the opportunity to do that. When I lived at Ramat Yohanan, Haifa was close, but with our 6-day-a-week work schedule and the Baha'i Gardens only being open to public tours in the morning, and the lack of public transportation on a Saturday, I figured the best time for me to see the Baha'i Gardens was to make an intentional trip a little later on by train, visit some friends back at the kibbutz, and actually take a day to get a proper tour of the gardens. Yesterday, we went to the Baha'i Gardens. Unfortunately, we went in the evening. There was no tour being offered. We got to visit the first terrace. It was very pretty. I took many pictures. But we didn't have a chance to learn much at all about Baha'i faith or why the gardens are there. There was a plaque explaining that the gardens are the final resting place of the Babe. I don't know how to pronounce the word. I don't have a Baha'i person to speak to about it. I apologize. And that, as such, they are a sacred space. We saw one person granted access to the gardens. I assume that the lady was a Baha'i. I'm very appreciative of the fact that they only offer public access to the gardens during a limited span of time, thus allowing people of the faith to visit in privacy and solitude and to have that oasis of contemplative quiet that they deserve. That seems to be the intentionality for which the very gardens were built. So I'm not resentful of the fact that we couldn't go in at that hour. I just wish maybe we had flipped the whole trip around and started at the Baha'i Gardens and worked our way south instead of starting at Caesarea and working our way north. Maybe then we could have learned more of who are the Baha'i and what it is they believe. I still hope to delve into that at a later date. The night ended up with a birthday celebration back at Beit Milman, along with further discussions about reincarnation, however, exploring it from a very different point of view. I'm hoping to, within the next day or so, maybe today, God willing, I have the inspiration and the uninterrupted time, to write a paper looking at the two different views of reincarnation that I encountered yesterday and what I feel about them, along with the difficulties presented in talking about such spiritual concepts. Anyhow, that is all for now. Lihitraot, and to those of you in the States, Laila Tov.